Scotland's crafty crime writer Ian Rankin wrote his first novel on a school jotter when he was 16. Today, he is an award-winning fiction phenom who still, when he starts a book, never knows who the culprit is, so he plays detective to turn out his page-turners that are often based on real-life cases. When Rankin completed his 18-volume Rebus series, he invented Edinburgh cop Inspector Malcolm Fox from the Complaints Department. It is my pleasure to welcome Ian Rankin back to Vancouver, back to Studio 4 to tell us more. Nice to see you. Morning. You should really write more.
Oh, give me a break. I used to write 2 books a year when I wasn't making much money, just to survive. But as soon as I could afford to stop that, I stopped, because 2 books a year was quite a lot of research.
I'm sure. And much of your work is based on cold cases, real life cases, doozies, as you call them.
Yeah, I'm a news fanatic. I read about 3 newspapers a day and watch news on TV and listen to news on radio. And I'll scribble down ideas and cut things out of newspapers, put them in a big folder. And whatever takes my fancy, come October, November, when I'm starting to think about the next book, gets me. I mean, this one was a story in a newspaper. The new one started with a story in a newspaper, which led me back to 1985. I looked at old newspapers from '85, looked at the political situation there, and the way that we were terrified of some things that we're not terrified of anymore, but new terrors have come along to replace them.
Terrified of what then?
Well, back then it was global cooling. We were going to enter a new ice age. We were terrified of acid rain. Gorbachev and Reagan were having a debate as to whether the Americans would be allowed to put nuclear missiles in space aimed at Russia, and if they did, Russia was going to do the same back at them. So that was all very scary. And in the UK, we were scared of Irish terrorists and also Scottish terrorists.
And the split really between Scotland and the UK.
Yeah, I mean, this was at a time. Well, this was at a time when Scotland had just had a vote about whether it wanted devolution, a measure of independence from England, and the vote had gone against. And the Nationalist Party was at an all-time low. They were at 15% in the opinion polls. They're now in power. 25 years on, they're in power in Scotland, and we're closer to full-scale independence than we've ever been. But back then, there were a disaffected few who decided that they would have to use bombs and anthrax to try and get independence from the UK.
Why did you call it The Impossible Dead?
I can't start a book without a title. So
really?
Yeah, before I start writing, there's got to be a title, even if it's only the working title. And I had 4 or 5, again, during the course of the year, I scribbled down good titles. You know, I don't have a story, I don't have a plot, I just have a good title. I scribbled them down on bits of paper. So I gave 5 to my publisher. And the one they really liked was The Impossible Dead. And I said, are you sure it doesn't sound too much like a zombie movie? And they said, no, we like it. So then I had to think, what would the story be that would involve a title?
Exactly. The Impossible Dead. How could you possibly be dead? Well, you are. And you're dead by a gun that didn't exist.
Yeah. This was something, again, I read about in a newspaper, was this a case in which a police officer had been hiding away firearms that were supposed to be melted down, that had been taken from gangsters and thieves, and then selling them back on the black market. So these guns existed that should never have existed.
And Inspector Malcolm Fox, he works in the Complaints Department, Internal Affairs, he and his team. And when you work in Internal Affairs, as you know so well, you get after bent cops or dirty cops or cops that aren't doing it quite right.
Yeah, and everybody hates you.
Pretty much.
The bad guys hate you, your own kind hate you, everybody mistrusts you, you have no friends. When I first talked to someone who worked as a complaints officer, Internal Affairs, I thought this is interesting because these cops are the antithesis of Rebus. Rebus is the kind of cop they would be investigating. They've got to be whiter than white, on the side of the angels, never break the law, never cross the line, work well in a team. They're almost like professional voyeurs, they're spies. They sit there in their surveillance vans and watch what's going on.
Sure, and they know police organizations well because they have been in the other side of police organizations.
And they will eventually go back into them again. This is a bizarre thing for me, is that after 4 or 5 years, Malcolm Fox will no longer be in the complaints. He'll be back in an ordinary police station, working beside people he may have investigated.
Exactly. And a lot of cover-up, I hear tell.
Yeah.
Circle the wagons.
Absolutely.
Be it cops or be it firefighters or any organization, strong union, brothers, brothers in combat,
Well,
in the Army and the Navy.
This is another thing I liked about writing about a complaints officer, is that unlike Rebus, who would probably be pretty much stuck in Edinburgh, you know, he couldn't go out with his jurisdiction. The complaints are invited by different police forces to come and investigate them, so it all looks clean, it all looks above board. You don't want your own internal affairs department investigating your own cops.
Was there a real man named Rebus?
There is a real man named Rebus.
There is a real man
but
named Rebus?
I didn't meet him until after I'd written many of the books. His name is Joe Rebus, and he lives in Edinburgh. And I go drinking with him on a Friday night.
Really?
Yeah, and when I'd been away from Edinburgh for I mean, a rebus is a picture puzzle. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's a picture puzzle. And I'd been away from Edinburgh for years, went back, and the first guy I met was this guy, Joe Rebus, in a pub in Edinburgh, and he lives on Rankin Road. That's the most bizarre coincidence, and it is a coincidence.
That is.
The thing is, real life is like that all the time, bizarre, but you can't do that in fiction. Fiction has to be believable.
Which is the odd thing.
Yeah.
When did you first register an interest in writing? I said you were jotting a lot in your little jotter, so your first novel was short.
Yeah, it would be about
I'm
20,
assuming.
20, 30 pages,
20, 30 pages.
Yeah.
When did you know this is just what you wanted to do, simply?
Oh, back then. I mean, as soon as I could pick up a pencil or a pen, I wanted to draw cartoons, comic books. I would get little bits of paper, fold them in half, make little booklets, sketch in little, you know, hang the man type characters. I was writing song lyrics for non-existent bands, and then eventually those became poems, and the poems became short stories.
Well, you are a poet, too.
Yeah, I haven't written poetry for an awful long time, and you haven't seen any of my song lyrics.
No, I haven't, but I know you're a music fan.
Oh, I love music. Well, I think a lot of writers, especially ones that I know well, we're all frustrated musicians. We'd all much rather be in a successful rock band.
Can you play the drums or a guitar or
play
bass, anything?
No. My oldest son, he plays pretty good blues guitar, so I lived through him vicariously.
Sure, but if you were having a great night, you would listen to whom?
Oh, all sorts of stuff. I mean, if you want to get a party started, I mean, I would have, you know, some Van Morrison and some of the Stones, the Kinks, anything from the 60s and 70s. But then if I'm listening late at night and I want to chill out with a little glass of whiskey at the end of a hard day, then it's Leonard Cohen. You know, it's got to be.
Our own.
It's got to be.
We claim him.
Yeah, Lenny.
Lenny.
Laughing Lenny.
Laughing Lenny, and and he's a Buddhist too.
Yeah.
Of course, which I doubt you are.
No. I mean, I'd be sitting there with my whiskey, not thinking of Buddhism. Yeah.
Someone wrote or said, when you started, you didn't mean to write crime fiction. You had this love of comics and.
I mean, I studied American literature at university, and then for my PhD, I studied Scottish literature. And I thought I was writing my first couple of novels from the tradition of people like Robert Louis Stevenson, who's Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
I was really wanting to write about the Jekyll and Hyde nature of Edinburgh. The fact that there's a city that the tourist and the visitor never sees, which at that time in the 80s had the highest rate incidence of HIV and heroin injecting in Western Europe. And nobody was talking about this or discussing it. And I thought, if you want to discuss this real city with these real problems, do crime fiction. I didn't read crime fiction until after I started writing it.
And who do you read now?
I read
James Lee Burke.
Anybody called James. James Lee Burke, James Elroy, James Salas, you know, you name it. I'll read them. Yeah, there's lots of them. And lots of good young British writers. Denise Minot, who's in Canada at the moment on tour. There's a kind of whole school of Scottish crime writing. It's a small country and not that violent, but you wouldn't know it from reading the crime fiction.
But there must be a pretty dark side because you seem to find it.
Well, I mean, Edinburgh's got a dark side. You know, Edinburgh's a city where if you scratch the surface, you find corruption and you find a history of cannibalism and body snatchers. I mean, this stuff all happened. It's all documented. And in some ways, Edinburgh is still quite a dark place.
And not all Scottish towns are.
Well, I don't know. This time of year, they pretty much are.
Pretty much. And you said earlier that this is your time of year when you plot.
Yeah.
November, December, October, November, when you come up with ideas and you perhaps polish up a plot.
Yeah, I mean, for the next book, I've got about 2 lines. I've got an idea that's 2 lines long, and I'll start writing it on the 2nd of January. But between now and then, I need to get more than 2 lines of an idea.
I hope.
So maybe this tour, you never know. You just walk in somewhere and someone gives you an idea.
Well, and you also have a title, I'm assuming, because you say you start with a title, or do you
I've not got a title yet.
Haven't got a title yet?
I've got one that could be a working title, but I'm sure my publisher is going to hate it.
Okay, and that happens.
Yeah.
John Irving starts with the last sentence. when he writes.
I never know what the last sentence is. I never know who did it, so how am I going to know the last sentence?
Well, that's the funny part about how you write.
Well,
So
the
it's
first
probably
draft,
as exciting for you as it is for us to read it.
I reckon if I don't know who did it when I start the book, the reader probably doesn't know either. You know, it's not like I'm leading you up to this point where it's going to be revealed.
Do you let anybody read what you write? Your wife, the son, and see if they can figure it out?
No, my wife reads the second draft. Nobody gets to see the first draft. It's very rough.
Right.
I would show her the second draft, and with this book she said, I don't understand why he's doing this, and I don't like her, and I don't like the ending. And so I changed all of that before I sent it to the publisher.
Okay, and that's the Irish connection for you, is it?
The Irish connection? Well, she's from Belfast.
She
grew up in Belfast, yeah. Still got close family over there. Yeah, I mean, when I started dating her and going over to Belfast, it was a kind of weird, scary place. You were still getting searched as you went into the city centre. Bombs were still going off. That's all changed now. It's an amazing place now, Belfast.
Amazing place, I hear tell, and much has changed. Twitter's here, and you Twitter, you tweet.
I was tweeting just backstage here this morning.
Were you?
Yeah, there's a photograph of me just going online backstage.
How
here.
great, because I know you went to, was it Beath High?
Yeah, it's my old high school.
The old high school, Beath High. So Ian Rankin from...
That's
did
my
you write
Twitter
under
name.
a pen once? You did. Didn't you write
Jack
under
Harvey,
Harvey?
my son's name, yeah. I didn't want him to grow up to be a writer, so I stole his name.
Okay.
It's my wife's surname and his first name.
As you should.
Yeah.
You swineherder.
I was a swineherd as well, I know. That didn't last long because I killed one of the pigs accidentally with an overdose of alcohol.
No.
That was that was a shame.
I thought the swineherders just herded the pigs.
Yeah, well, you feed them as well. And it was attached to a vineyard in France. And after we crushed the grapes, I was supposed to give the skin and pips to the pigs.
Right.
But I left it out a couple of days in the sun and it fermented. They got drunk and one of them died.
No, it's tragic. But
it was tragic because we couldn't use
it's
it.
strange.
We couldn't use it. It just
Don't write that in a book. They'll say that couldn't happen. Well, you know, they are now raising cattle with and feeding them red wine.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Apparently makes the beef
beer,
better.
beer and stuff, and you rub their stomachs and massage them and that. Yeah, I know.
Right. Yeah. Well, that poor old pig you killed. I doubt
But,
anybody ate him.
But it had a great time before it died. It really did.
Ian Rankin, our guest, and as you guessed, he likes the comics. But he's a great crime writer, and we'll come back and talk more.